Hey everybody, Ben here. I am with Brandon and Brad. We are about to get into the nitty-gritty of Dragon Quest XI. Just so you know, we're going to be talking about everything. Nothing is off limits, so if you haven't finished this very long game, this is your chance to get out. And spoiler mode starts right now.
Spoiler mode, final warning, spoiler mode activated.
All right, Dragon Quest XI. I am sitting here with Brandon Jones. This is the very first Dragon Quest ever. Bradley Ellis, who has loved Dragon Quest in the past. We've both played through it. We both saw the two different endings, the true endings.
Right.
And so we can get into the nitty-gritty and talk about everything. But I'm actually interested to start with Brandon. And before we get into specific plot points and really drilling down, I just want to know, as somebody who's just a little bit less familiar with Dragon Quest, what stood out to you? What did you love?
I mean, this kind of is getting more into gameplay than actual story, but just accessibility. Just there was very little in this game. I never got stuck. I think there was one time I didn't know what I was supposed to be doing, and then I asked you, and you got me back on the right track. And once you told me what to do, I was like, God, the game did tell me to do that. I just wasn't paying attention.
Right.
I think it was go back to the gal in Nautica and ask her, and she would like point you in the right direction. There's one location I hadn't visited, but I was just. Every time I was so excited to go back and play the game because it was, I feel sad for anybody that played just the Japanese version. It didn't have the run button. It's just, man.
Sprint, yeah.
But it was just so much fun, just running around. And like, I've never really understood the benefits of having the enemies on screen, but you still go into a contextualized ring of like combat.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, to me, it's either like do random battles or let me just fight something out in the open world, but this weird kind of mix. And I didn't really get, and I got it this time because I was like, oh, I get to decide who I'm fighting. I get to decide when I'm fighting. I'm not just running around if I'm grinding and I hope something randomly attacks me. I can be like, no, there's a thing right there. I'm going to go run over and attack it. And so it I just sprinted through this whole game. I was just like, yes, I want to go to the next quest. Like, yes, I want to meet the next characters. And I think compared to something like Octopath or compared to even like Final Fantasy VI, like I don't think there were, as a party and really kind of like the whole story, I wasn't really like deeply emotionally affected.
Yeah.
I think there were only a couple times I got a little misty or like really got emotionally involved in what was going on. I thought some of the storylines were really clever. I loved the prince that was like, didn't want to fight and didn't want to rule, but like, wanted his cake and eat it too. But I think the number one takeaway and the thing that just bit me right away, I was like, I gotta finish. I'm gonna play this whole thing because I did not think I was gonna be at this table. I thought I was gonna finish this game in like February, and I was like, I can't stop playing this because I know when I get in, I'm gonna get into combat really quick. I'm gonna get through that mission really quick. Even just running through it and talking to people. It's why I turned dialogue off because I'm like, I want these conversations to go fast, not to skip them, but because it's just was so much fun to me to absorb this game. I felt like I was at a trough and I just kept shoving this game in my mouth, and it was great.
Something that I think really gets thrown at Dragon Quest a lot is that it's like overly traditional or it's too slow, and I think there is validity in those complaints to a certain degree. But what really stood out to me, and I don't think people are championing enough with Dragon Quest XI, is there is very little fuss when it comes to you doing what you want to do.
Yeah.
I mean, you're in the middle of somewhere, you want to zoom to somewhere else.
Yeah.
Like you can pretty much go through an entire area without fighting anything.
Yes.
It's like, hey, you want to forge stuff? This is going to be at all of these different camps, which are scattered all over the place.
Not only not fight anything, you can literally on horseback just like boom,
plow through them. Yeah,
over
that's a
them.
great point.
exactly the way.
And that to me just made the experience so much more enjoyable and made me want to go out there and chase everything.
Yeah.
Because I felt like I wasn't working against the game was working around me, and I really appreciated that.
Even though I wasn't like anchored to the story really emotionally, I still wanted to move on. I still was dying to see like the next area. My favorite thing in this game is the towns. Is the mood that changes
A hallmark.
when you go to these different areas and them talking about like it's not just that we have a sauna here. There's a volcano right there. Like there was just a lot of. It was really interesting to learn the stories and discover these new areas. And I think in 2018, and I hope forever, there's a place for a franchise that's like, we're going to go back to the cozy feelings that you remember. We're going to go back to these things that have worked for so many decades in RPGs, and we're just going to make that thing fun instead of like, here's this new weird mechanic that's now going to,
Right.
you know, may possibly offset things, or that we need to desperately put in there because we want to sell this to a new audience. I went into this game being like, please give me just classic NES like vibes of just like going back to Final Fantasy 1, Dragon Quest 1, and Dragon Warrior. The only other game I played. I did play Dragon Warrior 1.
Getting into that kind of classic vibe, I feel like Dragon Quest XI really does very explicitly feel like a huge celebration of the series, and I want to get into that. But before we do, Brad, as somebody who really loves and swears by Dragon Quest VIII, and you kept saying before release, like, I just want this to give me those same feelings. Did it give you those feelings? Did it surprise you in any way? Did it disappoint you in any way?
Yes, it surpassed pretty much all it did what I wanted and a bit more. The only thing I would say I was a little disappointed is the story didn't feel as personal as 8's, since you're tracking Dolmagus down like half the game like that. Like, the villain just kind of comes out of nowhere, like Mortigan. Like, you see him at the part at the Yggdrasil tree, and like that's kind of like it. Then he just kind of like goes back to them. Like, I know in 8 there's Rapthorn at the end like that and everything, but like the journey of chasing Dolmagus down throughout the world, I felt like so much more intense and personal in that kind of sense. But they can't do the same thing again. It would be just kind of boring. So I'm glad they switched it up.
Right.
But I was very pleased with the game, especially you were talking about that earlier, like the little changes that we noticed, like getting Zoom really early on in the game, being able to travel around really early, getting evac really early. Like, you didn't get that stuff for a while in 8. And even getting the horse mount, like, you don't get the mount in 8 for like a long time. And you still get in combat when you're riding that mount.
I'm glad that you brought up the villains, because I actually do agree that Dragon Quest XI, with both Morrigan and with Kalasmos at the end, are not especially compelling villains. And I think if you really zoom out and you be super reductive about Dragon Quest XI, it is very intentionally mimicking Dragon Quest 1, Dragon Quest 3, the Dragon Quest 1 through 3 storylines. You're kind of doing almost identical things. But I think what really stands out to me in Dragon Quest XI from a storytelling perspective is it sort of sets you up for that, and in some ways it delivers on that. I don't think any of the villains I was like, oh, I really hate this guy, I can't wait to bring them down. There just wasn't enough motivation, I guess, or understanding or personalization of those villains to really feel that way. But I think because it kind of sets up you being this chosen one, you fighting against this ancient evil, the moments where it really does come through and deliver a character that has a lot more depth than I'm initially expecting really hit home with me. And rewatching it this morning as I was doing research for this very spoiler mode, Sylvando especially stands out to me. He stood out in the game, but he especially stands out to me here. And what is so great about Sylvando is he's this very flamboyant, loving, like, kind-hearted character who loves the circus. And they never, or at least from what I remember, they never really present his identity as being weak or being less than or being less true than his companions. He is wanting to save the world because he wants to bring happiness to people, and he's not apologetic for who he is. And then his whole storyline with his father, where when you first meet Sylvando, he kind of comes in and is like, listen, I can see through your bullshit, Prince. Yeah. Listen, I'm willing to go immediately with you to take on this monster. He's initially presented as this strong-willed kind of like amazingly honest character, and then you see that scene with his father where he's hiding behind the hero. It's like, wait, this isn't the Sylvando I know. This one thing, his father rejecting him, is what is most important to him. And then he comes out and his father's like, no, like, and him referring to Sylvando as a knight, like
his knight's oath,
right?
Well, it's interesting you chose the word and then he comes out, because there are definite undertones of being gay,
Right.
being kind of ostracized from a community, being flamboyant, as you
Right.
said, having difficulty really embracing who you are and wanting to take that as far as you can, not like I'm going to be reserved in my personality because that might be off-putting for some people. And I love, that his dad's like, angry, but for totally different reasons,
Yeah.
just like, I need you
He's
to go
just
out
like a
there.
hard ass.
Because what an impossible task, making the entire world happy. It's never,
Yeah.
you're going to have to start right back over. And I love that about him. I remember when he's coming back into town with his parade,
Oh my
I
God.
went by the entrance of the town and just watched it the whole, because after he's like, quick, let's go back into town. And then you can just run into town, but like I stopped there and saw like
Everyone's
the parade. It
dancing,
just slowly like came down the walkway and I was like, this is great.
Yeah, it is.
Then
It's
you
so
put
much
on the
fun.
outfit and your character starts dancing. Oh, it's so good.
And you need him. Like I think in any RPG, like you need that breath of fresh air. Just like, oh, thank you. Like, yeah, he was in my party. I think I swapped him out when I got my cousin, my
Grandpa?
grandpa, and all character
Jade.
names. Jade is my cousin, right?
No,
No.
she's
No?
from a different kingdom.
She's
My aunt, or
No.
you're related
No.
to her somehow.
no,
You're not.
not,
Oh.
not
She-
family.
So
Oh,
she
that's
helps
right.
you
That's
get
right. You're from-
away.
that's-
Yeah.
Like she was close with your family, but they're
Correct.
not family.
Correct. She's the daughter of the king whenever
Right.
or the granddaughter of the king.
King of
whenever you meet
Heliodor.
him again.
Right.
But yeah, I think I swapped. That was the only time I was like, she seems a little more relevant to the story right now. Sorry, Sylvando, but
Yeah, and
he was in there for a while.
like I think about Sylvando and his issue with his father and his reasons for going along with you on your quest feel a lot more personal than some of the others, whereas you have like Jade and your grandfather Rob, who are very explicitly connected with you and your past and your whole identity, and Hendrik as well. And then you have somebody like Eric, who it's so crazy to me because when Eric first joins up with you, I was like, really? Like, just like, yeah, I was told to help
help
you
you,
out because
yeah.
you're the luminary. Whatever. I believe in you. Let's go on this quest. I was like, you're not going to give me anything more? And then eventually, many hours later, you get into like, oh, I was told to help you because of this tragedy that happened with my sister. And that, the sense that I'm trying to convey is I think if you kind of only make it to the first introduction with each of these characters, you not only don't get their story really at all, but because it comes so much later, their motivations, their histories,
Yeah.
it kind of hit me a lot harder than I was expecting.
Sure.
And the way that they present them all is so different, because I feel like in RPGs, like you can kind of get into this routine of being like, okay, now we're going to do a flashback with this character and their deep personal story. And it didn't feel like that. Like Jade and your grandfather, Rab, is it Rab or Rob?
It's Rab.
Rab, okay. Were kind of entwined in the main narrative a little bit better. Hendrik was a big part of the main narrative. And so, like, what they were doing, why they were doing it, how it was introduced, the delayed payoff, I think made it a lot more satisfying for me in the end. And yeah, like that game, really, the way I felt about it at the beginning and the way that I felt about it at the end, because like after the first set of credits, you're just kind of bombarded with revelations of characters that were hinted at and not properly addressed, and then all of a sudden it comes in and it's like, no, here's how they're tied into everything.
One of the things that made me okay with getting new party members, not necessarily learning like their life story when I met them, or really like their relevance to like why they would be in the party or why I would be spending that much time with them, is the first loading screen shows you the entire party, sans Hendrik. And I thought that was very interesting. So like when Sylvando's just like, oh, the mysterious Sylvando, it's like, well, I know he's joining my party. And so I was just so happy when I finally got to that point. And as I said before, the game just has such a great pace to it. It's just so, I never felt it dragged at any point, to the point where, to the detriment of the whole experience.
Right.
And so I was okay when I didn't necessarily know a lot about Eric or Sylvando. It was just kind of like, jump on in, dude.
Right.
We're having an RPG adventure. Let's do it.
There's one part where the game dragged hard for me.
Where's
like
that?
Full break. When you go back through all the dungeons, or like 3 of the dungeons for like in the post game, you go through like several of the dungeons again. And some of them are really long. Like the evil castle at the end, which like you just go through it backwards instead. I'm just like, dude, come on, man. I'm getting like Bravely Default flashbacks right now.
The golden one with all the weird staircases.
Like I
and
love
stuff.
the boss at the end you could fight, and if you do well, you get a better reward and stuff like that. I love all that, but I was just like, come on, dude. You're just padding it right here.
I want to go back. We talked about Morgan and Kalasmos a little bit. We touched on them, but I want to talk about Jasper a little bit and
Jasper,
to be very critical of it. Like, kind of what a waste of a character in
He
my
wasn't
opinion.
really in it that much.
Well, not only is he not in it, it's kind of this like lustful for power servant of the main villain kind of character. Whatever, like that thing writes itself. They just never go anywhere with it. And I think the only reason it's so frustrating to me is like at the end, especially, they hint at this conflicted relationship between him and Hendrik and what is motivating him to do the evil things that he's doing. And it's like, you're not going to give me any more than that. I think
Well,
out
even
of
that, like the two people that are training together and one wants to,
Right.
I haven't even watched an episode of Naruto and I know that's a lot about
Oh, it's
Naruto.
like you're saying, it's your typical anime story.
I just think about the time that you spend with all of the characters. Like when you go to Rab and he's like super skinny on the mountain.
Oh my God, yeah.
Or when you have that scene when you get attacked by Hendrik and it's just you and Jade hanging out. Like, you kind of get this nice one-on-one time. And you get that with Hendrik when the world turns to ruin. But he's kind of a character that I'm like, you just needed a little bit more here. And I think Jasper could have been this vehicle for exploring that character further. And they hint at it, but they never follow through with it as well as they do with some of the other characters, in my opinion.
I think that might be an issue of you just get him like halfway through the game.
Right.
You just don't get as much time with him. But some of my favorite moments are with him, though.
What are those moments specifically that you think?
When like the world is in ruins, like the world of darkness kind of thing, and you team up with him, like me going to Helidor Castle with him was like my favorite part of the game.
Yeah.
The typical Huber uneasy alliance, kind of like working together, kind of thing, like just fighting the Lich at the end, getting the Jasper confrontation. Like I was like, yes, this is so good. Because it reminded me of like Zelda at the end, like you're in the throne room, it's all dark like that. You got your demon guy coming out. And I was like, yeah, this is like Zelda.
I agree. I think kind of the world of darkness part after that point when you first go to Yggdrasil and you Morgan is there and makes everything turn to shit is such like. Other JRPGs have done this, right? Where the world has turned to ruin. But I think the reason it works so well in Dragon Quest XI, I think, is kind of what you're hinting at, Brad, where it's not just like, oh, okay, everything's bad, now go deal with that threat. It's like, everything's bad, and you're going to go to all these places and see what's different and how they've changed and slowly piece together your party. Thinking about like Final Fantasy 15, that is another game where the world turns to ruin. And there are things I like about that as well, but you just don't kind of get that kind of
like just comes near the end of 15. Like this is like way earlier on in the game,
right? And I think it being earlier on works to its benefit, and I think is another strong point of Dragon Quest XI, where all of the locations matter a lot. And I know you said you kind of didn't like going back to dungeons, but I feel like they kind of use the revisitation of spots to make those places so much more meaningful. Like you really come to understand.
I think it makes sense because you get the different arcs when you go back to them. Like you got the arc with the mom and her son turning into the dragon.
Yep.
Stuff like that. But like, yeah, just the dungeons because it's just repeating an area and nothing like new story-wise, I'd say.
But yeah, just how much I came to feel familiar with the world and appreciate it, and how much I like learned those characters and their storylines. I thought was fantastic.
And it's like exploring the world. I know you and me talked about this, like how diverse the world felt, especially compared to like when we think about 8, the last like big 3D one, where like there was a lot of different towns in, but they all kind of like had the same kind of art style. Like they would feel different, but not as vastly different as this. Like Gondolia was just like Venice pretty much, and there was Porto Valor, which was like a Mediterranean town or something like that.
Right.
Just like Greek. Yeah, a little Greek. Just like adding a little more variety throughout it was great.
Yeah, and you think about how kind of crazy it gets at the end of the game where you go to the heavens above and you have like these Majin Buu looking alien
that's
creatures,
exactly what I
right?
was thinking.
And you're right. The diversity of the world is there, right? And it's all really wildly different. But what makes it effective, I think, is it gets increasingly outlandish as it goes on. And so I think by the time you get to that point, it makes sense, and everything that you've seen before that point kind of justifies it. And so you're not having this jarring moment of like, wait, I'm here now? What?
I love the little dudes, the little invisible guys.
Yes, Brandon.
Oh my God,
Yes.
yeah.
It's the first thing you see in the entire game.
Yeah.
And they're always there. And I just loved that the game is telling you, like, there's more. There's
Right.
more that's going on. And so even when you go into that first fight, you're like, I know more is going to happen. So at least they like plant that seed. I love the scene where it just climbs over Rob and the Luminary's like,
Yeah, just
It's like
watching it move.
Right.
Like, that's unusual. But I just there's nothing to do with the story, but it was so funny. The guys, the Majin Buu guys, at the end, I spent a lot of time at that your pop up furnace. I can't remember what it's called.
Fun Size Forge.
The Fun Size
Forge.
Forge. I was at the Fun Size Forge, but the one that's like in their hut, you know, where you can go off and do the challenges. And you're so close to like the first guy, and like they do head tracking when people like follow you in town that are looking at you. And so like the whole time I'm at the Forge, this guy's just like, like staring.
Wait,
at
you
me,
didn't
like,
hear
the
their
entire
voices,
time.
did you, Brandon?
No.
I think you would have been furious if you heard their voices.
They're all caps, right?
They have like weird baby voices, like high pitched baby voices.
The
go
the
back.
elder just
So
like
good.
again not necessarily a new concept, but the fact that he can just like not stay awake as he
just falls asleep, all the time.
He's tired. He's really good. Brandon, there's something that you said that I really liked that I think ties into another thing this game does really well. Just constantly hinting that there is more going on. And you mentioned the little invisible guys, which is very true. But also when like Morrigan destroys the lantern and you're like, wait a minute. And then they're like, oh, like if he doesn't do that, Kalasmos will be here and everything will be bad. Or you have those scenes where you're kind of talking to this ethereal figure and you're like, I can be whoever you want me to be. And you're like, what's going on? And it's like, this could just be some sort of weird divine presence. But it's like, no, this is actually the mage that betrayed everybody. And just taking the opportunities to fill things in and make them more meaningful than they could have been. Like, a lot of these things could have been fine at face value, but I appreciate, especially at the post-credits, like that post-credits just feels so vital. Like, you're really...
Oh, it's 100% vital.
Yeah, you're not getting
everything. Yeah.
what you want to be getting in order to get through that.
They bring Veronica back to life in that. It's like, it's super important.
Yeah, it is. Let's talk about that, because when you get into that tower and you're like, hey, you could go back in time and save Veronica, and it's like, well, is this going to take all of the wind out of that sacrifice? Because it's so important, not just because that it happens, but because Serena changes so much as a result and becomes a much more interesting character, in my opinion, as the result of her sister dying.
I think that's very fair to say.
But it ended up not feeling cheap to me.
Not with her. Well, one of the things that this reminds me of that I think was fascinating was the juggling of ability trees in the story. So, like, getting Eric back after he had lost his memory and, like, he has no skills.
Right.
And you're like, whoa. Or, like, and then her passing, and then Serena gets all of her abilities as well and kind of, like, fuses with her sister almost. I thought that was interesting. It got a little frustrating because I'm like, I don't know what you're doing here. I don't know what to spend on what. So it was nice to, like, we'll give your points back. You can, like, reallocate them wherever you are. That is actually one of my biggest critiques of the story. I was kind of, I didn't want to bring this up until we like approached this part of the story.
Yeah.
But one of the few moments where I did get teary-eyed is when they like walk into that forest and like see her and they're like, oh, she's taking a nap. And I was like, oh no.
Yeah.
And like the flashback of her, I love that. I love those moments where everybody's panicking and you have one person that's like, I get it. You know, like I got it. Like I just, just when one person makes a sacrifice because they can think faster than everybody else can, and like I didn't even think about that in the moment. It was just classic RPG, like we all survived, yay! And it was like I love that they contextualize. No, there's a reason for that. There's a reason you were all separated, and it wasn't just particularly her to redo that sacrifice, because I did like getting her back in the party. I did think it was fun when you finally were reunited with her and she was like, what's the matter? Like, why
Right.
are you,
Mhm. Right.
why are you being weird? I hated that. To me, the story, not necessarily the story because I was still into it, but my relationships with the characters, when everything reset, I was like, I don't care anymore, like, because I don't know you people really,
Because they're like different
and like,
still.
and to me, that was one of the instances where the game really took a hit for having you be a silent protagonist,
Right.
Because then until I was like, I can put a lot of myself into this character,
Right.
and justify his decisions and kind of emotionally how I feel and my connections with these different characters. But like, if I was to go back in time, I would have a powwow immediately. I would have a sit down at campfire and be like, because I know they believe me, I'm a luminary, and I'd be like, hey, we have a great opportunity here. Let me tell you what happened. Like, you died. Like, crazy stuff went down. I know all about Sylvando. I know about your dad. Eric, I know about your sister. Like, let's get all this out so that we can be honest and we can approach this stuff. And it was just kind of like, oh, I won't tell any people. Like, Eric, that scene killed me when we go back and we're like about to open the door and Eric's like, oh, right. I got this thing with my sister. She's like frozen on the other side of this door. If you could just like help her. And then I go in and like, bing, no problem, buddy. It was like,
Right.
all right. It just kind of like, I was a little bummed that I felt I didn't have the relationships that I had before with them. And so I just kind of like, not necessarily tossed them out, but like they definitely took a back seat toward me, like really feeling connected with these people.
See, that's interesting because I really don't disagree with anything that you're saying. But it being separated by credits and then what
Yeah.
happened at the very end really changed my perspective on the whole thing, because I think what you're describing, kind of this personal story that's very localized to this group of people and their quest, the motivation for you to get into the time travel stuff is because of Veronica and her death, but it very quickly ends up not. That feels like it takes a back seat to kind of this whole thing of Erdwin and Serenica and who they are and what happened, and really tying it into Dragon Quest as a series. And so the way that I kind of appreciated it was, all right, you get that there, and it kind of continues a little bit, but now we're kind of expanding our scope a little bit.
Sure.
Because like at the very, 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 very end, they're recreating the opening from Dragon Quest III.
Yeah,
and it's like,
that was
oh,
sick.
Before we started, yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, oh my god, like this, you are saying that this is, and then obviously the dragon giving you the name of Erdrick as well. Kind of, I was not, like the game follows the old Dragon Quest games so closely, but for them to go that far and that explicit and present it in that way, it gave me just a whole new appreciation of the game, I think. I don't know. What did you think? Do you agree with Brandon that you being a silent protagonist and Veronica's death, like how did all that stuff play out for you? How did you appreciate it? Or not appreciate it?
Yeah, like sometimes I wish there was points where he could talk, like just having that conversation. Like, I can't remember if he like brought it up and it was like quickly brushed over, like, let me explain this to you, and like goes to black, comes back kind of thing. I can't remember if that happened, but like if he was like, hey man, this is exactly what happened, this is really crazy, and they're just like freaking out like in real time, I think that would have been way more effective, because that's a pretty crazy like thing to happen, especially in that game that's so long, and all of a sudden you're time traveling in the post game.
Right.
But otherwise, like I like expected that. I knew it was gonna be a silent protagonist. So that's just what Dragon Quest kind of does.
Sure.
But yeah, like he talks when he's a kid. Like when you go like to the flashback where you see yourself.
That's a really good point that you bring up,
He
Brad.
talks
Yeah.
when that like he talks to
didn't
you with
notice
some
that.
like British accent. He's like, "Oh, hey, what's going on?" Like,
Yeah.
but then you never talk like throughout the whole game. I was just like, "Oh, that was weird."
Yeah, that is very weird and jarring. It's a good thing to bring up.
And I think it could have potentially been solved if, I don't remember if he even got a name, but your like big jelly friend that sends you back in time with the diamond eyes. It would be interesting if that.
Oh,
if that
it's,
character,
That's Serenica.
Serenica, yeah.
It would be interesting if that character said it's important you don't tell your friends what happened. You know, like if you have to stay quiet because it'll offset everything. It'll screw up the
timeline,
timeline. But just kind of have some context there, because like in a way, all your friends die. You know, it's like in one way I got, I can't remember her name, Serena and Veronica. You get Veronica back, but at the cost of everyone I know. You know, it's like, because I
You just
go
leave
back
that.
in time and
Yeah.
meet these new people who like
Right.
didn't go through the experiences that I've had, and like there's all these memories that I have now that I can't share with anybody because they're gone. Like there's a whole timeline out there somewhere.
But I feel like
of these
the
people
game
that are-
does kind of justify that by being. It's not just like a decision that I feel like you make on your own. I feel like there's kind of this sense amongst everybody, like, hey, are we sure we want to do this? Yes, let's do it.
Yeah.
Let's go back to make this
They
happen.
definitely painted it as a sacrifice.
Yeah.
It wasn't just kind of, you didn't make that decision on a whim. I just, in choosing what to invest in emotionally, I was
Right.
like, oh, okay. The reuniting with these characters and then doing these endings again, I'm not nearly as invested in them as I was before.
Sure.
Kudos to them for letting you redo segments of the game when
Yeah.
you go back in time. Like, I stayed at the inn, and there was like that whole dream with your dad, like talking to you like that. I was like, oh, dude, you could like redo this stuff. They went that far into it.
Yeah, that sensation happened to me several times where it's like, oh, I went back here and there's more to uncover. Like everywhere you go back,
Yeah.
there's a lot to get involved in, which I really appreciated. About the time travel thing that I do want to touch on that I think it enhanced for me personally is you being the luminary and the chosen one and all of this talk didn't really matter to me at all until the very end, where it's like, okay, you can't use this unless you're the luminary, unless you have that mark. And so you give it to Serenica so she can reunite with her lover. And that like transfer of power and you doing that made kind of being a hero and the chosen one, it gave him kind of this character and this choice.
it's a send off. Like, he
Yeah.
puts
Yeah.
the sword back in the tree at the end, too.
That made me a lot more attached to him personally instead of just a vehicle for experiencing all of these stories, which I really liked. I want to talk about what you brought up before I mentioned that luminary stuff, Brad, and that is revisiting things, because I really loved that Cobblestone, starts out as this very small town, just as typical as you would expect, and then kind of becomes this last stronghold. But it's a place that not only matters in the story, but when you change, it changes with you, and you're rebuilding it, and you're making it have purpose. And not just Cobblestone, but I feel like every place really evolves pretty dramatically as the game goes on. Is there any place in particular that really stood out to you guys?
I mean, we're talking about Hendrik in the beginning, and I was definitely emotional when I like got back to Cobblestone, and they're like, "Oh, good thing you're here," but we're fine because we have that other guy protecting us. And I'm like, "Who protecting? What? That's where I grew up. Who's and you see Hendrik again, and like I thought he would be very much like, oh, sorry, about all these things that happened, but he's like very standoffish. He's like, I have a job, I have to do this stuff. So like that, I was all hot under the collar like during that scene, like during that whole tier before, like you said, we team up and then finally like go out. I definitely had thoughts and opinions.
I like Sniffelheim when you go back to that, and like Eric's whole arc, you go to like the Viking place and like that solid gold place. The town where the town we originally go through with like the painting and everything like that. You go back there with Sylvando, and like that's his whole thing, like his parade and stuff like that. Galapagos also with the prince. I keep forgetting his name, but like fighting more stuff with him, just seeing how all the characters evolve like that. But I think the Hot Springs town, I can't remember what it was. Hato, yeah, like just the arc with like the mom going through like the sacrifice thing going on with the two kids, like protecting their mom. Then the reason she's doing that is because her son got turned into the dragon. She gets killed by her son. Then you go through the volcano and stuff like that, save him. Loved all that stuff. It was completely different than what you're doing in that last town. Like way huger stakes instead of like just like going to the hot spring having a good time than like going to fight some like low tier monsters. Then big boy monsters, dragon.
See, that's interesting to me because the thing with the mom and the dragon and that whole arc didn't hit as hard for me as some other stuff did, and I think it's because of when it happened in the story, where later on, you have the threats that are happening to destroy the world. They feel a little bit more immediate, and so getting involved with other people's stories just didn't click with me as much. But the one that really did a lot, and I'm curious to see if it hit you guys as well, is the story of the mermaid and the lover, and just how that whole thing played out. And
yeah, I remember her VO was kind of goofy. I remember playing that.
Sure.
And when she just like kills herself and turns into bubbles, like no one cares. Like the luminary and Kyre just
That's a good
like,
point.
well,
That's a good
whatever.
point.
It's like I was like, oh, she just killed herself and no one cares.
Right. If you remove the "and no one cares" part, I think that's why it was so effective for me, because it's like, holy shit, this is ending on such a dark note,
dramatic, yeah.
and makes so much sense if you really piece together how this whole thing got twisted and manipulated, and like she just has nothing to live for anymore.
Right.
But you're right. There really isn't that emotion reflected back
On the
in the
characters.
party, and I do think that is probably a criticism that can be applied with many of the smaller stories that you get involved in. Is I do sometimes wish that you had those moments reflected back in the party where it was like, oh damn, like what did I just see, or just a little bit more, a greater number of moments of them processing it. I think.
Yeah, because there's a lot of moments in the game where it's like stuff's happening and you get certain party members' perspectives, but it feels like some of them aren't even there. Like,
Right.
there's parts where I felt like Rab was like way more focal, then he'd just be gone, like in the back seat for a while.
Exactly.
It's like I wish just a little something from everyone else to make them feel a little more involved.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Brad.
I really like that quest because, and I think 11 did a really good job overall with this, is like one of the reasons I love playing these huge, big world RPGs, not necessarily open world, but just like these big worlds with lots of different towns and people of different races and languages and, people in the desert, people in the snow, the mountains, up in the sky, is understanding how all of these different story beats and areas relate to each other. So having one person in a town talk about another town. Oh, I've never been there. I hear it's really interesting. And like this was an interesting example of that because you have this town that has this fear of mermaids that's unfounded because they don't have all the information. You have this mermaid who thinks she's been, shunned by her lover because she doesn't have all the information. It's kind of like you're in a unique position because you travel so much that you can kind of see the big picture and see how the ripples of these mistakes have kind of affected people, and in a lot of instances how you really can't do anything about it. Like you help him and you help you help the relative, the descendant of this guy that fell in love with this mermaid, and you help her in a sense, but like this town is still terrified of them, and you can't, like, there's only so much you can do to educate people on what's going on in the world. And so I think that's to me that's a nice takeaway that I get from RPGs when it's done well, because I think that's obviously the case on Earth as well. That like you can see that throughout history, that just like things got better the more we learn about people and learn about cultures, and like it's interesting to see that reflected in the rare opportunity of you having a magic whale and having the ability to teleport to other places and really see, kind of be on the outside looking in and learn like, oh, that's what makes this town tick. That's why everyone is so distrustful. And I think a little bit of backtracking with that one. There was like 8 instances where you're just like, back to the island, back to the town, back to the island. But yeah, I thought that was interesting. And I from the moment she was like, he left and didn't come back, I was like, oh, he's dead.
Yeah.
Because they do a little bit of setting that up. Oh, and another great point, a being that can live for so long, and a being that has a shorter lifespan, and could they have a relationship, and how would that be affected? Love that stuff.
I think your opinion on this game, right, like my perspective on Dragon Quest XI is going to be different than a Japanese fan's perspective on Dragon Quest XI, just because of how the series has been handled differently over here versus over there, and the things that have fallen in or out of favor or whatever. But to me, from my perspective, Dragon Quest XI kind of feels like a reorienting and celebration, where it's like, okay, this hasn't been on a console in this way since Dragon Quest VIII in 2005. Let's just kind of do the big RPG that celebrates the series, that follows things that we've done before but plays with them a little bit, which I appreciate and I think works here. I don't think you can get away with that and doing it again in Dragon Quest XII. And so
Sure.
Playing this and enjoying it so much, what things would you want to see carried over into Dragon Quest XII, and what things would you hope change?
It'd be nice to either have a more vocal protagonist, one that's kind of more, obviously you had like a lot of emotional connections to a lot of the characters in the story, but one that like either you get a chance to kind of decide who they're going to be, like a little bit of choice.
Right.
It doesn't have to be like the anchor of the story or like a big gameplay system, but it would be nice, like I said, it'd be nice a little bit to take, like, you had opportunities at camps, which I love. The camps, man, were probably some of my favorite. I probably had more moments of joy just looking at a camp than I think any other point in the game. Like, I just, like, every time I would stop, every time I get into an area and I'm like, I want to see what this looks like at night. And I would just like run over and like
Right.
set up a camp. And just the vibe that I got, I could go up and either like talk to them as a group or individually go up and talk to them, and they would give a little bit. Sometimes it was funny, sometimes it was very plot related. It was fun getting Hendrik and kind of finally in the party and then talking to him about those things. But I couldn't reciprocate that. Like, I couldn't then say, oh, fascinating point, here's how I feel about that, or here's what I want to tell you and have you know about me. A gender selection would be fun. Be neat if you could do that.
Yeah.
Just a little more investment in the actual main character. I think they don't need to change a thing about how they built this world. This world was so great. Reminded me of like Peter Pan at Disneyland, how you like fly over Neverland. Like when I got that whale, like I spent an hour and 40 minutes just like looking down and like, oh right, that's the spot. Just seeing some of these areas finally and how they, separated the overworld for the, you kind of got a little vibe of like what each of these towns was like, but then you move in and like, I can see, and even being in the world and seeing things from like a really far distance and like, oh, I can see my ship, or like, oh, I can see that castle, or I can see the I don't know what you called it, but like the Majora's Mask, like sun coming in on Gallipolis, like
The lantern.
Erdwin's lantern.
the size of that world was portrayed just masterfully. It was really, really well done.
I'm hesitant to say this because it could end up being terrible and overly complex when it doesn't need to be, but I really loved writing monsters and how
The dragons were
just
great,
a little
flying
bit
around.
it changed exploration and getting access to things that you couldn't access otherwise. I would like to see that taken just a little bit further, and maybe getting the monsters is a little bit more involved, where you have to weaken them instead of just getting through the battle, or they'll only join you under specific circumstances. Like, I think there's room there to kind of double down on that experience without hopefully going too far. But yeah, there's a lot of things that I would like to see. But what would you like to see, Brad?
I think you bring up an interesting point of like the encounters themselves. I was thinking about how in Persona 5 you kind of have like someone go off and do something in a boss fight.
Yeah.
Like I would like to see like more things, like more like phases, I guess, in the boss fight instead of just like things change a little bit in the boss fights, but like maybe like a little more involved. Like somehow you get like a monster in the fight with you, and like you're riding in the monster for the fight or something like that.
Right.
I would love if they can make these games as big as they are without loading. Like without loading zones. Like I wish there was just more, because like the zones are like big, but there's constantly like loading next zone. Like if it just felt like more connected in that scope, I would say would be really like just like another. It might be like really hard to do, but just like more buying into like how the world is actually connected.
Yeah.
So like the transition from a zone to zone like makes more sense, I feel like. So like you're going from a huge area and you go to town. There's like no loading or something like that.
Did you ever get stopped like in a canyon? Did you ever like go through a canyon so fast the game's like, wait?
Yeah, it would be like
it would stop
loading,
me and then like okay,
loading. Had a little, just things like that. But like a little more to the person, like a little more personality from the main hero. I would also like.
Yeah. I really like job systems in games.
Yes.
And Dragon Quest has done its job system, its vocation system very, very well. And I would be way okay with Dragon Quest 12 having a vocation system. The thing for me that I would really like, and I'm sure there are examples out there that I'm either just not thinking about or not aware of at the moment, but I feel like a lot of times when it comes with job systems, it's just like this mechanic. And there's not really a super strong narrative focus. Like, they might contextualize it a little bit or show you characters that have those jobs, but like there's not a process to it. And I think it would be cool if like having a vocation in Dragon Quest like really embodied that word, where it was a process and a storyline, and you felt super attached to it, not just to get more skills or to fill a role in the party, but to really get fleshed out and have a lot of meaning. Just on its
if
own.
they had like a quest line to unlock like their separate trees or something like that, for like it makes sense why they use that kind of thing. I think that'd be awesome.
Right.
Damn.
Yeah, I
a
would.
good
Really,
idea.
I would really like that a lot.
It did a little bit of that, just mechanics wise, because like Rab could just go claws instead of doing mostly magic, but which I tended to just kind of fall back on, like how they were introduced. I was like, okay, I'll just you use that weapon then, because that seems to be what you like. Oh, just pure technical thing.
Yeah.
How does Jade do melee? Do you just not equip weapons?
She has fist weapons, right? She's like
Is that what
claws.
claws
There
are,
are claws. Are
Yeah.
yeah. Claws. So claws are a specific weapon type.
Yeah.
That you
Right,
equip.
but she has one tier that's just like martial arts. Like, what is she wearing when she does martial arts? Like,
Well, I
what's-
think
what's
there's
the weapon.
I think there's like I think that's like her stat one more so. I think
Okay.
where like her health.
To be honest with
boost.
you, Brandon,
I can't. I'd have to look at
there
it.
were a lot of characters where I just kind of found a groove. Like I found a
I
groove.
gave her a spear and never looked back.
Exactly.
She
I
had
did
a
the
spear
same
the
thing.
whole
She was
time.
a spear user for me.
But I
It
was
was
just
so powerful.
Yeah, I was just curious. I love that she had like a couple of cool AoEs.
So I can't really answer that question. I should go in and like just reset it.
Yeah, we have
and
to
and
look at
figure
it.
it out.
Moving on.
Because I just don't remember her skill tree that well. I wonder if that's just like, because you know how a lot of the characters have things that aren't necessarily related to a specific weapon, but just buff them up in a general sense.
Yeah,
Or give
I think
them,
that's what it might have been.
Yeah, okay. I think that's what it might be.
because
but
it was
I'm not 100%
spear,
sure on
claw,
that.
and like one that other.
But to
thing.
touch on what you said, Ben, it'd be interesting if also if you had characters, because I've no problem if you can change a character's class, having them be introduced in the story as a specific class, and then if you want to, you can steer them in a different
Yeah.
direction. And it would be interesting if you had one person in your party that wanted to become a mage that wasn't necessarily a mage, and then the other mage in your party might have some things to say about that.
Right.
Might have to be like, oh, I really like your progress. You're learning a lot
training
more.
them, yeah.
I don't know how well it holds up for people seeing it for the first time today, but I remember at a young age experiencing Cecil's transformation from a Dark Knight to a Paladin, and that having so much weight for me, and it just being like this holy shit moment that
Yeah, it
really
was awesome.
made me care about his character, and I love things like that where the mechanics of your character line up so much with their motivations.
Yeah.
But yeah, I also want to. This is much lighter, but holy shit, the pet powers are really
So
fun.
cool.
They're-
So cool.
Like they didn't need to make them as cool as they did, and thank you so much.
You like some of the elaborate ones where they're spinning the wheel
Yeah.
and he's like throwing the dagger at it like
Yeah.
that. Oh, it's so good.
He's like soaring through the air, and
Yeah.
The one where Hendrik runs, jumps, Jade like lands on him and
Yeah.
like surfs him in the air.
yeah,
Yeah, it's so good.
Yeah, it's really good. All right, closing thoughts, Brandon. I saw you on Twitter message to somebody that this is one of your favorite RPGs of the year. After reflection, you stand
It's
by
just
that.
satisfying game to play.
Yeah.
I just was never like, "Argh!" Again, I got frustrated by that one point because I wasn't sure where to go, but it was more like nervousness. I wasn't like, there's nothing I can do now. I was just like, I can tell I've missed like some beat. But I think the greatest compliment I can give this game is I was not at all planning on playing it at the speed that I did. That I thought I was like, okay, let me just jump in, and I was able to just move past the parts I didn't care about, focus on things I did care about, all of the systems and the way that the experience worked and the way I would level up these characters and focus on the things I wanted to focus on. Just everything was just right there. Like there was just nothing that was like mysterious for no reason or put past something that I had to get past that I didn't want to do. I just loved everything. I loved meeting new people. I loved getting new people in the party. I loved encountering new areas. I think it was my favorite thing in the world. Like every time I went to a new town, it was just like, this is so great. And I'm just such a big world building is so important to me as far as not that like whether I'm gonna have fun playing a game or not, but whether I'm actually gonna be invested in what's going on and discovering a town, getting a sense of its flavor, and then moving on to another town, and then going back to that town later, and like when I go back to the Prince, and I'm like, oh, like you learned a real important lesson the last time we hung out. How you doing now? And he's like, mostly okay. And it's like he's still making mistakes and like still doing stupid stuff, and even like guards that are like in between towns and like would tell their own stories about like what it's like living in this town versus someplace else. Like I can't go to that other area because there's this dangerous a couple areas in between. I think that's really what resonated with me was the love of this world, and as being in the job that I am in, getting to that point in the second world where I'm like, I just got to beat this. I don't have time. Like, I really don't have time. I got to move on and maybe play Odyssey or get ready for Red Dead or something else. But it's like, it was fascinating to me that there's like 3 worlds in this game. There's like the world you start in, the world of ruin, and going back in time.
Yeah.
And it was like, I'd actually be really curious as a completionist what I'm missing when I go past each of those big story sheets. I was nervous, like when I got to that point, I was like, uh-oh, am I like burning some side quests here, or are there going to be NPCs that aren't around anymore? And as much, even though I feel that, you know, my connection to these characters lost a little bit of steam when I had to like erase them and kind of start over at like the 60-yard line and like restart the relationships. When I went back in time, loved going back and seeing the differences in their stories compared to like when I first did this moment to like when I'm going back now and kind of rushing through it.
Sure.
Kind of it was funny because I just recently saw it because Scott Pilgrim's on Netflix, but it reminded me of the end of Scott Pilgrim where he's just like, and he like goes back in time and just runs through, punches the guy, runs through, you know, and like it felt like that, and it was neat to do that in a story because I think Bravely Default kind of does a similar thing. You go through it as a party, and there are interesting moments there, but I felt this had much more of an impact on the world and yeah, not to open that wound.
No, it's just.
But
Bravely Default is a great game.
Yeah.
I stand by that. It is fantastic. It's just like this one giant wart on this thing that you think about, and you're like, this doesn't need to be there. Like you could have done the point that you were trying to do in a way that was a lot more enjoyable. But that's a whole nother conversation.
So this game didn't let you rewind 2 more times
Yeah.
on top of the one time
Yeah.
you did. Yeah, again, just I was by myself playing this game, remarking with a smile, man, I love this world. Like, man, I just love going to places. Like, I would just carve out every last little corner of every map when I walked into it because I'm just like, I love the monsters. It took me a little while to get used to the monster design because there's some that are just so goofy, and it was weird, like talking to a character and they're like, beware this dungeon, and like I go in and the aesthetics, like, oh my god, there's lava everywhere, and then there's a guy with cross-eyed, like,
Yeah.
okay. I'm like, okay, like, it was just a little kind of ping pong as far as like aesthetics, but just the way they animated, and I love the dual hands with the shield, the face on it. Like there's just so much interesting creativity that's just constantly popping up in this game that even if you were not into the story at all, I would be surprised if someone's like, I was not charmed by this world. You know, I had a hard time getting into enjoying just the aesthetics of it, and the fact it had like kind of like a cartoony style, but was still so detailed, and like I would look out in the ocean and there's just like not a lot of detail in that ocean, but still the scale of it is just so believable and just such a joy. Like I would finish gameplay sessions like just looking at this game for like 5-10 minutes, you know, like whether that was at a campsite or whether that was in a town, and I would just like walk to the edge. I'd be in not Gallipolis but Venice, I can't remember the name. Gondolia, like the end of Gondolia is just beautiful. Just going out there and just looking out on the ocean. I love a couple NPCs that like they're just always out there looking around. A charming game, hard to walk away from.
Closing thoughts, Bradley Ellis.
Loved it. Lived
Good
up to
closing
my
thoughts.
expectations, baby. A few nitpicks here and there, but
Yeah.
had a blast. If Dragon Quest VIII is a warm blanket, this is a warm electric blanket. man.
Yeah. Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
Send that to Square Enix. Put it right back in the box. The last thing that I want to say about Dragon Quest XI that I think is really remarkable, I think you just kind of get into a mindset with games where you're like, that's just the way they are. That's just the way games do things, and I accept it because it's familiar. With Dragon Quest XI, I feel like it does such an incredible job of making you want to go further and really rewarding your interest in doing as much as possible. Not perfectly. There are examples you can point out where that's not true, but when it got to after the first credits, it's not like, oh, I've come this far, so I might as well do it. It wasn't that sensation. It's like, no, I want to do it because you're giving me so much. I want to go back to all of these places that I don't have to go back to because you've written so much here. You've made this worth the time. And I just remember going through the review process of being like, okay, I want to do everything. I want to 100% this game. I don't want to write this script just because I'm feeling so immensely rewarded for doing so. And I wish I could walk away from more games feeling that way, where it's like, oh my God, you're giving me so much. I don't have to pay for this later. This isn't added on. Like, you could have made that post-credits part
$20.
DLC. Like, you totally could. And it just felt so complete and so deep and so rich that it's immensely remarkable to me.
Felt
they did
complete.
that,
I
yeah.
like that, man.
Yeah.
I love that the side quests, even when they were question marks, although you could see how many side quests were available.
Yeah.
So if you happen to do them all, you're just like, great. I gotta move on until that list, bumps up again. But I love that even the ones that were labeled as question marks would be like, hey, here's the rumor, some guy in
Yeah.
this area
They'll
wants
give
a
you a
thing.
hint.
Right.
And so like perfect way to get me obsessed with doing stuff. And even I had to walk away from my side quest log. I gotta wrap this game up. I don't have time. But they were there and they were tempting. And if this was like one of the only games I was playing this year, or I didn't feel rushed to move on to something else,
Right.
I would just I'd pick this game clean.
Absolutely.
Tracking all the
Yeah.
monsters I fought.
Because
Because there's so many monsters I skipped, especially in the later areas where I'm like, I don't need to level up now. Once everybody hit 99, I was just like, okay. But just monster types. I'm like, I want to fight that thing. That thing looks
Yeah.
like fun.
I hope it sells well. I
too.
know
Yeah.
Square Enix can be a little bit strange when it comes to sales, and so I hope this game is
Get it
getting
on
the
Switch.
support
Get it on Switch. Get it
that
on
it
Switch.
deserves.
I think it did well on
sure.
PC at least.
I don't know.
That's what I've heard.
But
That's
thank
what I've
you.
heard.
I just want more. That's really the ultimate
Oh
message.
yeah,
that
need
we
more.
take away
More
from
Dragon
it.
Quest.
Thank you guys
Builders
for
too,
watching
Builders
us. Yeah.
And that Amanda would come in and be like, hey, and just like give me a note or mention something, and she'd walk out and be going through the menus, and she'd turn around and be like, oh, because it's like same sound
Yeah.
effects,
Right,
it's like a lot of the
right.
same stuff. She's like, I want Builders 2. I'm like, it's soon.
Man, I still need to finish Builders 1. At some point, I need to finish Builder 1. All right. Thank you guys so much for watching. There will be more spoiler modes coming down the pipeline, so look out for that. Thank you guys for listening to us rant and rave and gush and squeal about Dragon Quest XI. It's an honor to do that, especially with these fine gentlemen. Thank you, Brandon Jones. And thank you, Bradley Ellis. And we will see you guys later.